Hello, very beautiful community. I'm so sorry that you have just witnessed a diplomatic catastrophe. Let's try to talk about it a little bit. I'm sorry to be coming through with sound, but late for health reasons, and don't be alarmed if I am topping up a little bit on my oxygen as I speak with you, because you know that I have the microvascular and heart damage for 8 months now. The machine's next door, so hopefully it's not disturbing the sound. Ambush of Mr. Zelensky. So let's talk about this. How did this escalate? So let's start with Trump, then J.D. Vance, and then Zelensky. Just making triply sure the sound is with us. So Trump said that Zelensky has so much hatred for Putin it's preventing him from making a deal. Then J.D. Vance got in and started speaking. Then Zelensky said, look, we did deals with Putin in the past and he broke them. Then Vance said, come on, we need diplomacy. And then Zelensky said, we did diplomacy with Putin and, look what happened. And have you even visited Ukraine, Mr. Vance? And then it escalated. So let's start with Trump. Trump has allegedly NPD, he has a narcissistic deformation of the personality. That's not self-obsessed people. It's people who don't have a sense of self, and it's people who cannot evolve their sense of self because they can't see their self. That means that when you're dealing with Putin, Putin wants to dominate you because Putin has plenty of narcissistic traits, but in my assessment, they stop short of NPD. He certainly has high sociopathy and has some features of psychopathy, but perhaps limitedly so. What that means is that Putin has a very sober and objective knowledge of the difference between himself and others, where he ends and where others begin. And he can effectively try to manipulate others out there in the real world. Trump can't quite do that because the others aren't real for him, as he himself is not real for himself. What matters to Trump is whether the person he's interacting with can be an effective object for giving him fulfillment of the narcissistic supply he needs. So what we saw from Macron's visit and what we saw from Starmer's visit is the fulfillment of Trump's narcissistic supply. Now, Starmer was awkward because he is awkward, but within the awkwardness, he did a master class of filling up Trump's narcissistic supply. Whatever that place is called now, tweeted a few days ago, something pissed some people off. I said, Trump hates Zelensky. I said, Trump hates Zelensky's clothes. Trump hates Zelensky's voice. Trump sees Zelensky as somebody off the street, somebody unhygienic, somebody you need to protect yourself from for the sake of hygiene. So Zelensky does not meet any of Trump's fulfillment of narcissistic supply needs, which is why Trump was turned off. I don't mean put off by Zelensky, that happened later, but actually just turned off, just not really alive, not present, not wanting to be there through the meeting. So that's a little remark on NPD. And then, of course, we've got impulsivity through ADHD, allegedly. So Trump said, without us, you don't have any cards. You're gambling with World War III. Now, in fact, it's whatever is the case of the risk of World War III through Ukraine defending itself, it's Trump who is risking World War III. Because the way we prevent World War III is by keeping our alliance system predictable, keeping our security guarantee predictable. And as we'll say in a moment, Trump has made Article 5 lose most of its potency in a matter of a few weeks. And that makes for a much more unpredictable and dangerous world. Come back when you're ready for peace, Trump says. Make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out and it's not going to be pretty. Putin went through a lot with me when they were doing the Russiagate witch hunt. You're in no position to tell us what we're going to feel, what we need to feel. That was when Zelensky said, look, it's us now, but it could be Europe next. And yes, you're behind the ocean, but it'll come your way too. And Trump basically said, don't you dare tell us what's going to come or not come your way. It's not your job to tell us what's going to come or not come our way. You're in no position to tell us how we're going to feel. All your cities have been flattened. It's good for the American people to see this. You are not grateful. And then a very, very important line. This is going to be great television. I'm going to say that. It's going to be great television. So that was Trump's act of performative cruelty, driven by several factors, but one of them was that his narcissistic supply wasn't being fulfilled at all by Mr. Zelensky. He couldn't boost his grandiosity in any way, the way he did with Starmer. We'll come back to what Zelensky could have done about that. Trump's statement. We had a very meaningful meeting in the White House today. Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation under such fire and pressure. It's amazing what comes out through emotion, and I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage, I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he's ready for peace. Now JD said to Zelensky, have you even said thank you once? And look at you, you're grabbing people off the street to fight your war. You have no soldiers left. And it's in relation to JD that I think it's important to talk about Trump and JD ganging up on Zelensky and talk about it being an ambush. So Trump was bored, unfulfilled, and then he was pissed off and a bit angry, but also a bit calm about the extent of the theater. He didn't think the situation was spinning out of control. And Trump is very used to theatrical conflict on television. JD wasn't feeling high emotions at all. JD chose to escalate the situation. Now, it's possible that this was partly premeditated earlier, it could be hours earlier, could be days earlier, but quite certainly, if that's not the case, it was certainly premeditated on the spot. JD was in control, the way Zelensky wasn't, and he was more in control than Trump. And he sat there, he thought about it, and in a confident and accomplished way, he decided to escalate the situation and ambush Zelensky. So this is this is a sort of accomplished bullying, partly driven by the perception of the reception of this on social media, as the Munich speech was directed to largely the American audience. And it was also done a bit to impress Trump. So it was a very calculated and contrived act by J.D. Vance, which is why I'm not going to accept the story that the situation just got out of control. Zelensky wasn't in control, but Vance was. And Vance made a deliberate decision to do this, and this is a kind of a bullyish ganging up, ambushing of Zelensky. Now you have to see it to believe it. So pictures of Marco Rubio. And that's what happens when you behave like a political entrepreneur, sell yourself out, and then you sit in a situation that violates all the values you have, and you have to suck it up and then tweet about how marvelous it was. Dugin's reaction on Telegram was, I beg your pardon, but this is marvelous. I'm not going to quote Mr. Zelensky's reaction. Let's do Mr. Medvedev's reaction. Let's do Mr. Zelensky. So you're witnessing something quite big, right? It's not because it's shouting and kerfuffle. It's big because it's a significant diplomatic event, and it's actually bigger than Ukraine. It's about your domestic politics getting screwed, and as a result of that getting screwed, your foreign policy gets screwed. So it's democratic decline. That's one manifestation of democratic decline. That's what you're witnessing, right? You don't have a little shit like JD behaving so manipulatively, right? In that political context, if your democracy is healthy, he doesn't get there with that behavior. So it's your democracy really, really struggling. And I'm not talking about the United States, I'm talking about Europe, and Western European countries are just an electoral cycle away from their Trumps. So that's what's happening, and the consequence of that is the foreign policy calamity and incapacity. The domestic political problems come first. Now, we have a certain ethic of being respectful of ourselves in this space because we keep returning to it. We don't impose views on each other in it. But what I'm going to say now will be challenging, but it's my responsibility to say it. It's going to be challenging in part because we live in a culture where we can't keep two things in mind at the same time. That's hard for us. So you're going to be finding it a bit challenging, and some members of the community will write comments in a sloganish way contradicting what I'm saying, but what I'm going to say is going to be a fair analysis. So Zelensky arrived flat. He arrived with a defeated body language, and he arrived not being in a position to try hard to win Trump over. He didn't do any of the things Keir Starmer did, which were humiliating, but very effective. When Vance, in a premeditated way, went for him, Zelensky wasn't prepared for this, and he didn't understand what was happening. When they ganged up on him, especially J.D. Vance, Zelensky was petulant, he was combative, he was unprepared. It's provincial politics, what we saw from Zelensky. Now you might say, come on, these characters are misbehaving. Zelensky is doing his best under extreme circumstances. Yeah. But politics is an extreme game, and it's precisely because of the level of responsibility Zelensky has for the lives of Ukrainians, for his country, that this requires a serious assessment. Now, what's being asked there of Zelensky isn't that high in difficulty. You don't need a political genius like Tony Blair or Bill Clinton to deliver it. Rishi Sunak, the ex-UK Prime Minister, could have delivered it. Keir Starmer delivered it. Zelensky is under the kind of pressure that they couldn't dream of, but Zelensky needed to do better here. Zelensky has been an extraordinary communicator and a very poor communicator over the last few years, both before and after the war. He can do both, and this wasn't good. And it's Bill Clinton who says that the key feature of politics and the key feature of a successful politician is the capacity to smile while you're eating shit. So I have to self-extract here. I'm not a Ukrainian citizen, so I just feel supportive of Zelensky in this situation. But I have to self-extract to be objective. And if I self-extract into being Ukrainian, I'm not saying it's what most Ukrainians feel, but I'm certainly saying that's what I would feel if I were Ukrainian, and many Ukrainians do feel it. I'd be outraged with Zelensky. Absolutely outraged for that underperformance. Now, he didn't misbehave. It's the others who misbehaved. But he underperformed under extreme pressure. And in a way that is continuous with the fact that since the conception of victory, that was the original conception of victory Zelensky had, was refuted by history, in part refuted by Western strategic incapacity, which is territorial liberation leading to regime change in Russia. Zelensky has not had a clear path forward that he could even articulate to his own country. That's why he has oscillated, between different presentations, different slogans, different kinds of implorations about the unbreakability of the Ukrainian spirit. And in a way that's much more understandable than a manipulative post-truth politician, Zelensky has been becoming a post-truth politician in the last year or two, because he has been saying either vacuous or mutually inconsistent things, right, about what on earth is the way forward for his country. Now why has he been saying that? Is he been saying that because he is disrespectful and he doesn't give a crap? No. He's been saying it because he is in an extraordinarily difficult situation which either has no solutions or requires inordinate leadership and clarity of vision, which he couldn't quite reach for. He reached for extraordinary leadership at the beginning of the war, but he hasn't been able to reach that in a second part of the war, in year 2 and year 3. And so he has been swimming in a soup of ambiguity in his communication, both with Ukrainians and with foreign media. And that's also not a good prep for having great clarity about what you ask for and what you argue for under these extreme circumstances, right? Where you've got a collapse of political seriousness in the White House. So thank you for bearing with that. You needed to hear that, right? Because you don't want to be living in Disney, right? And if you want to live in Disney, you can't, because when you have calamities like what you've seen, you need to wake up, you need to get real, and you need to put aside some of the fancy slogans and see politics for what it is. Otherwise, you're just putting yourself in a place to lose. Now, Article 5 is largely collapsed. It's not going to be possible to re-strengthen it by getting the Democrats in 2028 and bring it back to what it was before Trump. So the damage that Article 5 has accumulated is in large part permanent. What you can do is only two things. You can stop the damage from getting worse, or you can, over the next quarter century, form other alternative or complementary alliance structures that guarantee security more reliably. But Article 5 is sick, and it's never going to be healthy again. It's not going to be healthy in 5 years. It's not going to be healthy in 15 years. So that's roughly where we are at. It's not dead, but certainly it would be extremely naive to think that the Baltic states are protected under Article 5. They're not. Now, a few remarks in no particular order. The Europeans need to get clearer about what backstops and security guarantees might mean as far as the responsibility of the United States, what it is specifically that they're asking for. Because there's been a risk of oscillation between just vacuity, it's not clear what these requests mean, and some kind of extreme claim that the United States needs to go to war with Russia if Russia violates certain boundaries. So that needs to be made less aspirational and tendentious and more concrete. Now, of course, the worst case scenario is the withdrawal of US support from Ukraine thoroughgoingly and the refusal of the US to sell weapons to Europeans, to give the weapons to Ukraine. And that needs to be avoided, but it's a possible scenario. It's more likely now that the EU will seize Russia's frozen assets, and there's a European leaders meeting on Sunday in London, and you need to clarify what guarantees you want from the United States, and then intelligently but humbly press for them. You need to keep sort of pushing the story that, it's not in Trump's interest to blame Ukraine for failure of the deal. And there needs to be medium-term rearmament in Europe and more weapons to Ukraine. Now, a deal is very, very, very far off at the moment. And Putin's stance is that he's very happy tonight, or the Chinese are very happy tonight with this attack on a key ally by Trump and Vance. But, and I don't just mean Ukraine, attack on Europe too, by implication. But Putin's position remains that he is open to both a deal and to no deal. He's open to seriously pursuing the possibility of a deal, and he is open to negotiating without wanting to negotiate. He is open to sabotaging it. And the key criteria for Putin here is what's being offered to me an improvement on my hope of making Ukraine ungovernable and liable to be politically influenced by me? Does the deal get me closer to that? Then I'll consider taking it. Or does the deal get me further away from that, in which case I'll continue the war? Plenty of things are not sustainable for me if I'm the tyrant in the Kremlin, but at the same time there's plenty of things that are not sustainable for Ukraine. So on you go, carrying the war through into 2026. We're little by little moving into a politics of spheres of influence, in which Russia will have its own sphere of influence too. That's a danger in the drift of the Trump administration's politics. And that means spheres of influence at the expense of the long-standing alliance relationship that the United States has built up since the Second World War. The United States will be loosening sanctions on Russia. Millions of MAGA and MAGA adjacent folks would have loved this display of bullying, ambushing a politician who could be criticized, but who is in an extremely difficult and vulnerable position because of the imperial mania of his neighbor. And I'll give you a quote from Sagar Injeti, who presents Breaking Points with Crystal Ball, and Sagar is on the populist right. This full interaction, Sagar says, with Zelensky is insane. He's an emotionally incontinent idiot who dares to lecture and belittle the elected leaders of his benefactor on our soil. Trump and JD should send him packing with nothing. Ukrainians should be ashamed to have a leader like this. Now, I'm not going to comment on that. Ideologically, what we are seeing is what I call a hyper-neoliberal ideology being shared sort of in common in this sort of wave of global wave of authoritarian populism. And what that ideology says is you got to be able to buy everything you want, and if you can't, you should be able to threaten your way into possessing it or just to conquer it. So it's a kind of an interesting blend, a sort of leaking over from neoliberalism, just emphasis on the primacy of the market, into a kind of view of normal political interaction as a war of all against all in which might is right. Causally, if you look at Russian politics, in the 90s, Russian politics leaked from neoliberalism into hyper-neoliberalism. And hyper-neoliberalism is one of the three pillars of Putinite politics. The others are fascism and mysticism. So, insofar as that feature is universal to the global wave of authoritarian populism, Trumpism is a version of Putinism, and Putinism is a version of Trumpism in that respect, but not in other respects. And so we saw that very much expressed in the display with Zelensky. We'll buy something or we won't buy it if it meets our interest. And you saw how they tried to extort Ukraine with the initial presentation of the mineral deal. Then if we can't buy what we want, we will interact via pressure and threats that are anchored in a picture of the world that says there are no values, only interests exist and matter, and if you're strong, you'll be able to push your way through and implement your own interests at the expense of those of others. So that's a little bit of my reaction to this. Zelensky's fault here is unpreparedness, naivety, lack of self-control, and underperformance, which you could elevate under the conditions he's operating in to a moral failure too, because his level of responsibility is so extreme. He has a country hanging on him. But fundamentally, the all the toxic ugliness here is with Trump and JD, and especially JD. JD was even worse than Trump here because JD was entirely in control and deliberately did this, deliberately came in a calculated way instigated this. I don't accept that this was just a natural escalation. Now, Health Alive, I'm going to be with you for a live soonishly, could even be tonight, or if not tomorrow. So know that I'm going to be here to answer your questions and receive your challenges. Lots of love.